This week I thought it might be fun to talk a little bit about worship. So Brent is our creative arts pastor, and I thought I'd just bring him along and just ask him a couple of questions just to see what goes through his mind when he's thinking about worship. And when you really think, like, what is worship? So I want to ask, like, Brent first, is when you're thinking about worship, what do you think what is the purpose of worship in the church?
So I think part of it for me that's interesting is a lot of people like to simplify it down to like a singular thing, meaning they kind of like, oh yeah, worship is when we sing songs. Or, for some people it might be worship is, when I go to church, and the whole church experience is worship. But I think it's a lot of different things that are packed into, a time. I think it's, for one, as we talk about worship sometimes as like, Romans 12:1 that says, offering your body as a living sacrifice. So worship is not just singing. It's not just being creative. But as far as corporately, when we worship together, I think even that has multiple facets to it. And we've been thinking a lot lately about like liturgy and which is kind of the, obviously the traditions of the church, the pieces that we do. So a lot of people would think of them as like, communion might be something we would consider part of our liturgy. But I think even within worship, you have aspects of each one of those that you might want to see represented. So for example, like this past week, we did the song Lay It All Down. And that would be a song that you could say, okay, this song specifically is going to fill this role of confession. And it's going to be a time where during worship that someone can come in and say, okay, God, this is what I've been dealing with. And so I think you can break it down into smaller things and not be just overarching theme of like, this is what worship is. But generally when we come together corporately, I just want to see people be able to have a God experience, interact with God in a way where they can worship him on whatever level they are and not be so focused on like singing songs or making music, but more on just experience God in that moment.
So when you're, for a typical week, like for us, we're still toward the beginning of the week. And then the people we're going to be leading in corporate worship through teaching and just coming together as the body, and they're working right now. So what's like the process you go through for preparing for them being there and what their experience is going to be like? What's going on with you, and how are you thinking about them?
Yeah, so my process of like kind of how I pick songs, which is kind of the starting point. One thing that I do a little bit differently than a lot of worship guys maybe is that like I try to treat it like a pastor treats a sermon. So instead of just saying what songs are really popular right now, right, and say I'm gonna pick some of these songs that are popular, or saying what songs are other worship leaders doing. So maybe going, I follow Elevation Church and whatever songs they do, I will take some of their songs. But for me, it's more about, I start with like when a new album comes out, I buy a lot of these worship albums so that I can listen to them, see if there's anything that I think is good on there that really speaks to me personally, or I think would speak to the church. And then I put them on a list. If I find some songs, I put them on a list of songs that's like my possible songs that we might do as a church. And then I spend a lot of time like praying, a lot of time just listening to them on repeat over and over to kind of see, okay, like, God, what songs do we need to be singing as the church? What songs do we need to, what is the thing that we need to be saying together corporately? And so then once I finally get one of those songs that is really like hit the top of the list, I start using my own personal worship time. I learn the song. Then I look for that week where I'm going to, integrate that song and really spend a lot of time praying about, okay, when is the right week to introduce it? And then I have a system that I work it through. And the reason I kind of do it like that is because when we introduce a song, I don't want to introduce a song one time and then be like, well, that didn't really work, or people didn't respond well, and then cut it and never do it again. So if we introduce a song, we know we're gonna do that song 20 times, over the next couple of years. And And I feel like in doing that, it gives me some, as a worship leader, it gives me some a place where I can kind of say, okay, like, this is a song that we're supposed to be doing. Much like a pastor, sometimes you may preach a sermon that you don't think is going to be very popular, but you feel like, man, this is what this church needs to hear right now at this moment.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if it's going to be popular or not, because I know that it's the message that God wants me to bring. So in the same way, with the songs, I can kind of go, okay, like, this is the right song for this moment, and I know that somebody is needing to hear the song, whether it's the most popular song in the world or it's a song that nobody's ever heard of before. It's like we're gonna work through that. And then, so the idea, to answer the second part of the question of the expectation for people, then in turn is, just from a musical thing, like, I hope people are listening to that song. I hope that song is speaking to somebody and they're saying, like, sometimes we have people that are like, hey, I've never heard that song before, but I need to know what it is because I want to listen to it. And so that's one thing that I hope that people can take these songs and listen to them, is a simple, form of worship throughout the week. Another one would be just taking the words of them and just having them, even if it's like singing the songs to yourself. Sometimes people are like, man, I can't get that song out of my head. It's like, that's exactly what we want. We want, because then those songs become an encouragement to people in whatever direction, like we talked about before. Maybe it's a song of surrender, maybe it's a song of, that's uplifting and building you up. Like, you may be going through hard times, but God is with you. Whatever that message of that song is, then people can that can resonate and ring around their heads throughout the weeks. And then I kind of, the other piece of it would be is like, I think as people are prepping themselves for corporate worship, if we are worshiping throughout the week, if we are thinking about things through a spiritual filter instead of a worldly filter, then when we get together, it should be a time of excitement and celebration, right, because we're all prepped and ready to go. And sometimes, in churches, I feel like, let's say, we do a 4-song set for the main part. It's like, sometimes it's like, by song number 3, I'm really feeling it and getting into it. Right. It's like, well, that's because we started at a place, of down here, and we finally everybody starts to get the spiritual filter kind of, back in the right mind frame, which is good. That means we're, getting there. But sometimes I'm like, man, if we all just really came.
It'd be nice to start with the first one.
Oh, yeah. And you're just like, everybody's there because we spent our whole weeks, and I'm guilty of that as anybody else, being distracted, by other things.
Tell me about, like, so you'll expose the rest of the staff to a song. So we use Slack, and you'll put a song in there on a channel for us to listen to. When does it make that cut? When you open it up, it goes beyond Brent, and now you're exposing me and the rest of the team?
So that's after it's been, usually it'll go on my possible list, and then if I start to get it nailed down, I'll put it on a list for the rest of the staff to kind of listen to. Not every song I put on there is always a song that we might possibly do, because sometimes there's actually a ton of songs that I really love that I'm like, man, this song is powerful, but I also know it may not work in corporate worship. There are those songs too. Right. So occasionally I'll put songs on there that I'm like, man, this is a great tune. Like, it means something to me. It might mean something to you, but it might not work, for corporate worship where we're all sitting. Because some songs, obviously, in corporate worship, you want people to be able to sing along. And some songs don't work as well for that. If they're really like a rap song, for example, might be hard for everyone to sing, but that song could still be powerful.
So a lot of, like, I'm privy to a lot of things that most of the congregation is not privy to, and we don't have a huge staff or anything, so it lends itself to where there's not a lot of people in the building. So often I'll kind of slip in the building, and you'll be doing your personal thing in there. Sometimes I scare the out of it, and then sometimes I just listen. And so you really it's obvious to me you're really having an experience with the Lord. What's the most challenging thing about when you're in that place, when it's just you and the Lord, and then taking that to Sunday morning? What are the obstacles you have to overcome to be able to?
Yeah, so I think personal worship, which some people don't really understand as much, I think, because I think some people think well, I'm not a musician, so I don't do personal worship, like a musical worship time. But I think everybody should have those personal worship times, whether that's, I think in the same way that's like sitting down and reading scripture, like that's a personal worship time, sitting down in prayer. And I think people even within that, it's like sit down and play a CD or pull up a YouTube video, and you don't have to be physically singing along even to have a worship moment. So I think some people don't understand that, but for me, more so than any of those other things, like I encounter God most intimately, like sitting down and playing in a way that I'm not trying to make it through the song beginning to end, or I'm not trying to like play it really well or practice it. Like I'm actually just trying to engage God, and that's for me. That's I guess you could say that's like the language that I speak in most easily. And so the challenges of that translating are. There is a performance aspect that you feel when a bunch of people are together that you don't feel, obviously, when you're by yourself with the lights down. So that's part of the challenge, is how to translate it. Some of the other pieces of it are you start putting more musicians and more people into that space. Then you have to give allowances for that, meaning, I can't just go completely wherever I want, because obviously the band has to follow me, the congregation has to follow me. So if I'm singing different words than are on the screen, that might be a distraction for people. If I'm, singing in a different key than what I told the band I was going to play in, that's probably not going to sound good. So those are some of the physical things that are challenges. But beyond that, I think some of it's like, just the I guess along those same lines, like time restriction, because we're trying to fit stuff in within a certain block of time. So you can't just, I can't just do a 2-hour worship set and expect, when I open my eyes for people to be there. But I think the other piece of it is trying to make it as much of that experience as we can, despite all those things, trying to just say, okay, this is not like, it is a performance, but it's not a performance for the people that are here. It's a performance for God. And so trying to shift that a little bit and saying, we realize that no matter what we do, like this is going to be a performance, but we want our performance to be directed at God, and we want the people in the sanctuary and the musicians on the stage to be part of that performance. So that I think of it more, instead of feeling like there's the congregation out here and then the stage is here, that the entire church becomes the stage, and that we're all, instead of thinking this way, right, we're thinking this way, and like addressing God. So that's one way I try to overcome some of those challenges. And I think, another thing that is really helpful is like when people come ready to worship, and people come with a expectation of experiencing, God in this moment. And even simple things like, it's exciting to me, like if I look out and some people are standing, like when it, the timer goes down to 0 and people are standing and they're like,
it's kind of like your amen, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, let's do this. I'm ready.
Yeah.
It shows that people are like, hey, I'm anxious, and I'm if it's like, the lobby's full and it's empty in the sanctuary, like it's hard even as a leader to get, into it, because you're like, well, I'm going to focus on God, and hopefully some people are going to come in and join it. So those are some of the challenges. But I think, overall as a church, like I felt like even maybe it's been beneficial. We started so small. I think there was some of that intimacy that's always been there, that we don't feel a lot of pressure to be, like I said, we perform really well, but there's not a lot of pressure for that performance. Like we don't feel like we have to do something special all the time that's just like, hey, we're going to do this, and for you guys to enjoy it. I feel like we've always had a really good culture of understanding that like worship is about God, and we're just here to worship Him, not go, well, here's what I like, or here's what this is how I prefer to worship. It becomes more about like, okay, what do I need to say to God, and less about what do I like, or what's the worship band doing for me.
Right. Well, you do a really good job, and I appreciate how much effort you put into it and work. I never have to worry about what's it going to be like. Is it, is Brent going to do something crazy today? You stretch me, so I appreciate that piece. A lot of times, like I can recall songs you've introduced that I'm like, I don't like that song, and then 3 weeks later, I'm like it's my favorite song, you know. So you're stretching me that way, and I appreciate that. And a lot of people, when it comes to pastors, creative arts guys, or girls, working together, there's a lot of frustration because sometimes the arts people, they don't, like, they rely a lot on talent. I think a pastor could do the same thing.
Yeah.
But you work hard, and you put everything that you have into it, even though you could get by without doing that. And so I recognize that, I see that. And so some of you guys may be watching, some of you that are in ministry or going to a church going, man, how do I get a guy like that? So my favorite story to tell about Brent is, like, I found him on Craigslist. So you just got to see what the Lord is doing out there. And really, like, that's the funny part of it. But I really believe that when I came to Kansas City, I didn't know anybody. So I was just really just bathing this in prayer. And so Brent and I have been together, we're pushing 6 years now. And we're still married. Right? And so we, I believe that our ability to work together, the lasting ability, just finding a guy with great work ethic that not only is going to do Sunday morning worship, is going to be beside me and, like, helping with the students, whatever. Like, I can pretty much ask you to do anything and you'll do it. And I appreciate that about you. But I believe that comes from just focused, intense prayer, asking the Lord for what you need and letting Him provide. So I hope you guys are encouraged this week. We did things a little bit different, and can't wait to share with you next time.